Hey everyone. So where we left off with the last tutorial was having a map and also having the precipitation and temperature variables added to our Acer bar bottom table. So in GIS, we looked at the histograms that GIS creates, which are fine. I mean, they're an improvement over the ARC desktop histograms. But I don't like the fact that it has that it just sort of chooses these arbitrary bins for the histograms, that it displays, like weird decimal places, that it's got like the mean kind of in there. So I want to do one further step in terms of just data presentation and cleanup, which is to get this table out of GIS and into Excel, where we can create a slightly nicer version and one that we can control more version of a histogram in Excel. So how do we do that? We need that nice table to Excel tool, where in this case, the only shapefile that I have that has a table associated with it is Acer bar bottom. So that's my only choice, but you're looking for the shapefile that has these climate variables appended to it. And then I want to save it wherever you have a folder. I don't even know if it'll let you save inside of a geodatabase, but don't save it inside of a geodatabase. Save it inside of a folder so that you can access it easily with Excel. And then that will run. And if you go in your Windows, if you open a window, you should be able to then find that output table that you created in your folder. It seems to be taking a little bit longer than I was expecting it to do. All right, there it goes. So I already have, I've got on my other screen this folder open, so I'm going to open Excel. One thing that you need in order to do this in Excel, so here's my whole table, exactly what we saw when we opened the table in GIS, just formatted a little bit differently. One thing that you will need is the data analysis tool pack, which is right up here on mine. The data analysis tool pack doesn't come by default installed in Excel, but all it takes is basically a button click. It depends on your version of Excel, but if you Google install data analysis tool pack in Excel, then you can find really easily instructions for how to do that. It basically, you go to file and you click on a button, you just need to find it in there. And then this will appear in your data tab. So you need that data analysis tool pack in order to do a histogram. Okay, so first thing that I think I'm going to do is, because we weren't able to do the delete field because it kept crashing in GIS, I'm going to just go ahead and delete some fields here. Because I want to keep my species name. So I'm going to delete everything from temperature to my species name. I'm going to keep my FID and my GBIF ID just in case there's some point later on that I might want to join this back up to my spatial data. I don't think there is, but never hurts to just retain those couple of columns. So now I have a nice cleaner data set with just the information that I'm looking for in terms of the species name retained in this data set and the climate data. I am going to select all of these columns and put on a filter so that there's no chance that I'm going to mess up the ordering of the different rows relative to each other. I want them all to be able to sort in the same way. Okay, so let's make a precipitation histogram. So first thing that I'm going to do is just sort this so that I can see, okay, my data go from about 600 down to about 1600. In order to make a histogram, you need both a column of data and you also need a column of bins. Basically, how are you going to separate your data? I am not sure about this, but I think that the bins have to be evenly spaced. Although I'm not actually sure about that. But in a histogram, generally the expectation is that they're going to be evenly spaced. Otherwise, it can be a little bit hard to interpret. So I'm going to start these bins at 500, which is below my minimum. And then I'm going to do them in bins of 100. If I select both of those and grab the bottom, then I can scroll on down and just let Excel fill those in for me once it knows to go in units of 100, and 1700 is larger than my maximum value. So that encompasses all of my data. This is 13 data points or 13 bins. That's about reasonable. I mean, like bins for a histogram, generally around 10 is probably a good number to be aiming for. You don't want it to be 20, otherwise you end up with just like one column for each data point kind of thing as you start adding more bins. But that's it's a little bit, it's up to you. It's a I guess not a cartographic choice, but a visual representation choice. But somewhere in the order of 10 is a good number of bins. Okay, so then I'm going to go to my data analysis tool pack. There's lots of different things that I can do in here, including a lot of just basic statistical tests. I want the histogram. And so the histogram is now going to ask me for an input range and a bin range. So the input range are this whole thing of precipitation. So I'm just holding my shift button so that I can select the whole column of data for precipitation. And then my bin range is that thing that I just created. So again, holding shift to select the whole column. And it's going to put this in a new worksheet. So that means it's going to create a new tab, and I can name that if I want. So I'll just call this precip histogram. Okay. And so what that's going to do is create this precip histogram. And basically what you see over here are, okay, for 500, and this means, essentially this means less than 500, there were no data points. From 500 to 600, there was one. From 600 to 700, 0, 700 to 800, et cetera. 1600 to 1700, 1, and greater than 1700, there was nothing. So this all can be represented by a bar chart. So if we insert a bar chart, then we get a histogram on here. Right now, the x-axis is just labeled 1 through 13, but we can change that with a right click to select data, and then we can edit the x-axis and tell it add these labels to the x-axis. We could also add more data here if you wanted to display multiple histograms on the same chart, but in this case, unless you are using like the same axes, you couldn't put like precipitation and temperature on the same histogram because they have such different variables, but you could potentially put, January precipitation versus June precipitation on the same axis. Cool. So basically now we have a histogram. If you wanted to, I mean, this looks totally fine to me, but you could say, like, let's say you had a really low value down here and you didn't want to have all this blank space. You really wanted to emphasize the core of where your data are located. You can adjust the values and the labels over here accordingly. So if this is the, this one could basically be less than 900 or something like that. And I could add a 1 in here to represent that value of 560 or whatever the heck it was originally. And then delete all of these other guys. And then I would need to, just move these down so that it's just encompassing my new data. So now this actually represents that 560 something, but it's labeled as less than 900. And you can clean these up too, so that, you've got the labels in here of what is actually going on in those bins. If you haven't played around with charts before, other stuff that you should do in terms of beautifying your charts are things like adding axis titles, right? So you can add X and Y axis titles. So this is precipitation in millimeters. You always want to put units on axis titles, and this is count of points or something like that. Another thing that you might want to do, which I like, Excel for me always makes these like kind of puny little bars here. I like to fatten them up a little bit, which you can do in the format data series, and just change this gap width to be something a little bit smaller. I like, something around 50 to 100% or something works for me visually, so that the bars are a little bit fatter and the gaps are a little bit smaller. And then we are in pretty good shape as far as, if I filled in all of the labels across the bottom, then that's a pretty nice looking histogram, relative to what we can do, in GIS, just a little bit more flexibility. So hopefully that helps in terms of getting histograms. To do the same thing for temperature, you would need to then create different bins for each of these temperature ranges, and repeat that same process of creating a histogram and displaying this as a bar chart in your insert bar chart. Cool. I will see you in class. Thanks.